Welcome to the Commercial Property Podcast. My name is Suzi Carter. I am a chartered surveyor. I've been involved in commercial property in the UK for 30 years and I've done hundreds of commercial property deals. I'm here to be your guide through the commercial property market, whether you're an experienced investor or whether you're literally thinking about dipping your toe in the world of commercial real estate. I will be here talking to you about all kinds of things commercial real estate in the UK, and I've also got some fantastic guest experts who are joining me. So please do subscribe if you'd like to follow, and if you'd like any more help or information on commercial real estate, please do click www.suzicarter.com, which is my website, and you can find out all the ways I can help you. So stay tuned for this week's episode. Welcome back to the Commercial Property Podcast, and today I'm going to be talking about tenant conversations on site. So as an investor, before you buy a property, it's really, really important, if there's a tenant in place, for you to go and speak to that tenant. And it might sound really obvious, but there's some real do's and don'ts that you must and mustn't do when you go and have those conversations. And those conversations can absolutely be the difference between you, A, buying the property, and B, not buying the property. But also, they can be the difference between you getting an inside track from the tenant versus other investors not having that information. And the key to it really is rapport. And, you know, like any relationships we make, whether we're networking with other investors, whether we're speaking to kind of anybody really, it's all about building a rapport. And so many investors kind of blunder into conversations with tenants without really having an agenda in terms of what they want to find out, and they don't approach things the right way. And I do field trips with my board. My 6-month program, which is my board, and I have a small group of investors, and I do 2 field trips as part of that board. And when we go around sites, I make a point of going to speak to tenants just to demonstrate how much information you can get from tenants. And this isn't a kind of cynical approach to speaking to people. It's a genuine, friendly, inquisitive approach and inquiry. And if you build rapport, tenants are more than happy to talk to you and to tell you about anything you really want, whether you're kind of just popping by and having a chat, or whether they know that you're potentially going to buy the property. And, you know, when I speak to tenants, I can get everything from how much they're paying for water and electric, to how happy they are with the landlord, to how much rent they pay, how trading is, etc. So there is a real skill with this, and don't underestimate it, because, as I say, it can be the absolute difference between doing a deal or not doing a deal, but also the competitive advantage you might have over other investors, other landlords. And, you know, loads of my clients have got this competitive edge from these conversations. And, you know, for example, one of my clients bought a property in auction, and there was a tenant's break clause in about 3 months after the auction date. Now, there was a big assumption, I think, for other potential buyers in that auction that the tenant would operate the break clause. But because my client made an effort to speak to the tenant, find out what had been going on, he found out that actually the tenant had done a load of fit out work. So when a tenant spends a lot of money on a property out of their own pocket, the likelihood is they're going to stay long term, because they need to write off or amortize that money over a longer period of time. And sure enough, they didn't operate the break clause, and he got a big valuation uplift as a result of them not operating the break clause. So this kind of stuff is absolutely crucial. Now, there's 2 ways that you can approach a tenant. One is on a viewing. You know, I'm coming round with the agent, or you know, I'm coming round and I am the potential landlord. Or you can just go in as a kind of mystery shopper type approach. Now, obviously with retail, it's a lot easier just to pop in. With industrial units, unless they're kind of customer facing, and certainly with offices, it's very challenging sometimes to go in and just start having a chat. But with retail, it's really easy. You can go in, you can speak to the store manager or the person serving you, you know, how's business? Kind of, you're happy here, how long have you been here for, all very innocent questions, but you can find out a lot of information. In an ideal world, you would do both approaches. You would have the conversation before you could do the viewing as a kind of mystery shopper, and secondly, when you do the viewing as as a potential investor, because you will get slightly different answers. So there was a bit of a standing joke when I was in the corporate world that whenever you're doing a rent review with a tenant, suddenly it became the worst performing store in their portfolio, because obviously it's not in their interest to tell you how well they're doing there when you might be putting the rent up. So just be very kind of careful and listen to the agenda behind some of the answers if you're going in as a potential future landlord. If you can go in and just ask questions without any agenda, then very often you'll get more truthful answers. And just another top tip with regard to retail is that if you're going around a retail unit, if it's a national chain or even a kind of a chain that has more than one property, even if it's two or three, they sometimes have the sales in the staff room. They sometimes have the kind of leaderboards in terms of the rankings of the different stores. And so, and they very often forget to cover those over. So you can have a little look at that as well, if they let you into the staff room. So that's just something else to look out for. So it's really important to have these conversations with tenants. And if you can't approach them face to face, then you'll need to call up head offices or the owner of the business or whatever. Because when there's an incumbent tenant in place, they are operating under a lease, they're paying a rent, they've got a relationship with the building, they've got a relationship with the landlord. And the information you want to know is basically, are they happy? Will they renew the lease? Is there anything that they want to be different about the property? So, for example, if they've got a ground floor shop with uppers, say 2 floors of uppers, and they aren't using the uppers at all, it might be that actually when it comes to lease renewal, they may not want to renew on the uppers and may just want the ground floor. That obviously it could be a potential problem or an opportunity. A problem if you want just to keep it as commercial and just get the tenant paying a rent. An opportunity if you've got other demand from either non-commercial uses, resi, or other commercial uses like serviced offices or health or estate agents or whatever else going into the uppers. So problems and opportunities in those kind of circumstances. So it's really important to have these conversations, and actually the rapport, just to repeat that point, is really important. I've had a situation where I was told by an agent and a landlord that the tenant of an industrial unit didn't want to renew. But when I went for my viewing, I got on really well with the tenant, and they said to me that actually they didn't like the landlord, they didn't like the agent, and they told them they weren't going to renew. But if it was a new landlord, they absolutely would. And in fact, they'd take a 10-year lease, and it would, it would be on institutional type terms. And so now they may say that to everybody, but equally that could be some great intel to allow you to have more confidence with your numbers, your purchase price, and ultimately your asset management strategy. So this stuff is really, really important. And so there's certain questions that you need to ask, certain agenda items, if you will, that you need to have, but please don't pull out a list and say, right, next on my list is to ask you about trading or whatever. It has to be very natural, just to chat, very friendly. You haven't bought the property yet, probably, or if you have, obviously that's a different scenario. But if you haven't bought the property yet, then, just looking at it, got a number of other things, but, we always like to build a rapport with our tenants before we buy, and certainly, whilst we own, we like to form a partnership. All those kind of phrases can give the tenant comfort. Now, obviously, don't say those if you're not going to behave like a partner. This is all about being very ethical. But equally, the world of landlord and tenant relationships now is much more a partnership type relationship than the kind of confrontational relationship we used to have as landlords and tenants. All tenants thought that landlords were trying to screw them over, and or landlords were trying to potentially wanting to get higher rents and, didn't really care about the tenants business. Now, obviously I'm going back 20, 25 years now. Things have changed significantly. There is a genuine interest from landlords these days, if they're good landlords, about the tenant, whether they're happy, because ultimately with supply and demand, you want to make sure that your tenant is going to stay, your tenant is going to be happy. And if there's any problems, you want to kind of nip them in the bud early doors. So when you're kind of, just to set the scene, when you're doing a visit to a property, you're doing an inspection, this isn't a social call, this is a due diligence call. It's probably one of the best elements of your due diligence that you're possibly going to have. And a lot of investors either say too much or say nothing at all. So there is a balance. But, tenants, if you play your cards right, tenants will tell you more in 10 minutes than you can get from a data room in 10 hours, 10 days. So this stuff is really, really important.
This episode is brought to you by Bond Finance Limited, your trusted partner for commercial property mortgage solutions. Are you an experienced residential property investor about to diversify into commercial property, looking for funding options? Bond Finance can help. Whether you're planning to expand, refinance, or make a major property investment, Bond Finance provides expert advice with access to a wide range of lenders, from high street to specialist. Book a free discovery session today to explore how we can tailor commercial funding solutions to your unique investment strategy. Visit www.bondfinanceltd.co.uk and take the next step in your commercial finance journey.
So you're going in, you're not the landlord yet, you're certainly not the tenant's friend, but you're just a professional investor gathering insight. But equally, you're a nice person who genuinely cares about this tenant and will genuinely care about them when you take over. And that's the kind of approach. So just avoid promising things, saying that, if I take over, I'll make sure that we sort that out. Saying when I buy it, because you may well not buy it. So it's all about just being very friendly, but pretty neutral about that. So it's always, if just a little bit of word, if you're doing a viewing with an agent. So if you're doing a viewing with an agent, then sometimes or very often a tenant won't be as open. So you could start having a chat with the agent there, but you may want to have a proper chat separate to the agent. So you may want to say to the tenant, look, just realised we're a little bit short of time here, but would you mind if I call you direct? We can just have a quick chat about kind of how you're getting on the property or whatever, and then you can have a follow-up call. And if they like you, if you built a bit of rapport in the short time you've had with them, they'll probably agree to that. So and then so it's all about being non-threatening, no commitments, keeping the conversation open, being really friendly and building rapport. So the kind of categories of things we want to find out is, when did you first move into the property? Again, you're not kind of like looking at a checklist going, okay, so when did you first move into the property and kind of being very abrupt with it. It's all about forming a conversation. When did you move into the property? Does the space work for the business? Do you still need this kind of same space you needed when you moved in? And obviously what that will give you is whether they want to downsize, upsize, whether they want to be here long term. Also find out if they've fitted out recently. It looks really good in here. Have you fitted out recently? And if they have, then there's a likelihood that they may want those alterations to carry on, to be written off over a longer term period. So does the lease still suit you? How you operate? Anything you change about the property or anything you change about the lease if you possibly could. Obviously, what you're reading between the lines of there is risk of them breaking the lease, whether they're going to renew, any tensions in the property. You also want to be looking out around the property, using kind of 2 ears and 1 mouth, but definitely keeping your eyes open in terms of the repair of the property, and then checking back to the lease as to what the repairing obligations are. So there might be a big dilapidations claim you might have against the tenant. And, that might be something that you can use in negotiations, say on a lease renewal or rent review. or even like a break. Very often they have to have complied with the lease terms, and so that can definitely be used. Have they have you made any alterations to the property? Because they may be illegal, or they may be legal, but what you're looking for if they've made alterations is whether there's a license, a landlord's license, granting the alterations, because very often leases need that. How do you find dealing with the landlord or the managing agent? Find hidden tensions there, many management friction. Very often tenants, when you ask them the right trigger questions, they'll sting like canaries, especially if they're frustrated. If they ask for, if there's maintenance that's the landlord's responsibility and it's not being done, they will tell you, believe me, because there'll be frustrating. It'll be frustrating for them to deal with them. And then the building, any quirks with the building, anything, I should probably know about the building that's not obvious. So you might want to, again, compliance risks, service issues. Some good things to look out for are, boxes in front of fire exits. I literally have had as many hot dinners as I have. I've found boxes in front of fire exits. Genuinely, like, it's a very common thing. Loading and unloading. Are you happy with the amount of parking? Can you load and unload? For industrial, do you find that that the yard is sufficient for what you need it for? Do you have enough doors, etc., etc.? You can look at the specification of the building. Does it have, for example, if it's an office, suspended ceilings? What are the environmental credentials? Does it have a lift? Does it have a reception? What's the loos like? So lots of different things to look out for. Just keep your eyes open for any maintenance issues or any compliance issues. Is there a fire alarm? Are there sprinklers? Do you think they're needed? And obviously, if you do go ahead and put an offer out which gets accepted, you'll need to do fire risk assessments and electrical surveys and various other things. Are you happy here? Do you want to carry on trading? Or you could say, I see your lease is expiring in a couple of years' time. Are you happy carrying on under that lease? Are you happy? Do you think you'll be happy to renew? Do you think this is the right base for you, kind of longer term? Those kind of questions, always really useful, because when we value commercial properties, or when valuers value commercial properties, short leases are worth less than longer leases. So if a property's got a break clause in, or if the lease expires, then the valuer will price in risk there because it's technically a shorter lease. But if there's a likelihood that maybe you get another 5 or 10 year lease out of the tenant, then you're going to automatically see a value increase once that lease is put in place. So it's really important to find out whether they want to stay, whether they've fitted out recently, whether they're happy, and also, is the business growing at the moment, or how many units do you have? Are you growing? Are you expanding? Or are they contracting? Because obviously that could affect you. And if they're a chain, for example, retailer, what's your usual criteria these days for finding a new store? And it could be, we need a town of 50,000 people, and if yours has only got 20,000, then there might be a risk that actually your property no longer fits their criteria in terms of location. So you're trying to look at relocation risk, growth upside, any other upside potential there as well. Definitely don't talk about what if you owned it, you wouldn't behave like that, or what you'll do, or I'll happily put a break clause in, or whatever for you. You just want to be very neutral. Thanks for being so open. It's been really great to chat to you. If I buy it, I really look forward to continuing this conversation. And then that's nice open. It's you're still building rapport, and keep your questions nice and open, because as I say, tenants quite often will volunteer information. As I say, I've very often found out what all their bills are, how happy they are with the landlord, by saying very, very little, just being super friendly, very interested, and a nice person to deal with. And just remember, it's often not what somebody says, but how they say it. So look at body language as well, hesitation, body language, tone, because they may not be telling you 100% of what is true. Some tenants are very wary about landlords and kind of being open with them. If it's a multiple chain, they may have been trained not to be totally open with landlords. So just look at whether you think they're actually telling you the truth. And if you can, this is where the benefit is. If you go in as a customer, or send a partner in or a friend in as a customer. Obviously, it's more difficult to do with offices and industrial than it is with customer-facing businesses like retail, leisure. Then you may get a different story. So it's just important just to kind of compare the two. And this is all part of our due diligence that we're looking at. So obviously, build a rapport, leave the meeting very positively. Thank you for sharing, look forward to being in touch if we buy it. And, these tenant conversations, they're really risk management and looking for upside as well. And leave with clarity as well. And, if there are frustrations with the existing landlord, they will tell you. Believe me, they will tell you, because it's a lot of frustrations are often bubbling up. So, if you can, that's not necessarily a deal breaker, but if you can go in and be a better landlord, then obviously there potentially is a better relationship you can form with the tenant. And some tenants just won't renew leases or will break leases because they don't like dealing with the landlord, because they're unpleasant, they don't like dealing with them. So again, to build that rapport is really, really important. And I think kind of as just a general rule, if you can talk to tenants well, you'll probably buy better buildings, or you'll spy better opportunities than other investors can. And one of the kind of common pitfalls I see a lot of investors making is being too businesslike, too brusque with tenants. And actually what you want to do is be very open, very friendly. You're obviously still being businesslike, but you're not just being short, you're not being disrespectful. And that will definitely be the difference. But, as a golden rule, always make sure you talk. If there's an incumbent tenant under any kind of license or lease, you must speak to them before you buy the property. Don't bid in an auction unless you've spoken to that tenant. Don't put an offer in unless you've spoken to the tenant once or on multiple occasions, because you really do need to know the intel that they're going to tell you. So talking to tenants, super important, but there is a skill behind it. So make sure you don't fall foul of some of the tripwires that you can have when you're having these conversations, and make sure that you use it to your advantage to absolutely buy better deals. So I hope that was useful, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Commercial Property Podcast.